On a sold-out SkyLink Airlines flight from New York to San Francisco, a storm was brewing inside the cabin, far more turbulent than any weather outside. It began with a woman's furious scream, a torrent of entitled rage directed at a silent black man in a simple unbranded tracksuit. She saw a man who, in her eyes, didn't belong in the upgraded economy seat he occupied. She saw someone to be belittled and removed. What she didn't see, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that the quiet man absorbing her vitriol wasn't just another passenger. He was Malcolm Bennett, the founder and CEO of the very airline she was flying, and she was about to commit professional and personal suicide at 35,000 feet. The recycled air of the Airbus A321 hummed with the predictable symphony of pre-flight chaos, the rhythmic click-clack of roller bags, the murmur of 100 conversations, the cheerful, slightly strained chimes of flight attendant calls. It was a soundcape Malcolm Bennett knew intimately. To most of the passengers filing down the narrow aisle of SkyLink Airlines flight SL-275, he was just another face in the crowd. A tall, well-built black man in his late 40s, dressed in a simple gray tracksuit and wearing unassuming noise-canceling headphones around his neck. His seat, 24B, was an aisle seat in the SkyLink Plus section, the few rows of economy with 3 extra inches of legroom. He had paid the extra $89 for it just like anyone else. This was Malcolm's quarterly ritual, flying incognito in the main cabin on one of his own planes. No fanfare, no first-class suite, no fawning staff. He called it his ground truth tour. It was where he saw the unvarnished reality of the customer experience he had spent 2 decades building. He learned more from a single 5-hour flight in economy than from a dozen glossy PowerPoint presentations from his marketing department. He saw how the flight attendants really treated passengers when the executive suite wasn't watching. He felt how uncomfortable the seats became after the 3rd hour. He tasted the coffee that his catering VPs swore was artisan roasted. Today's brew tasted faintly of burnt cardboard. He made a mental note. Malcolm's father, Harold Bennett, had been a union organizer at the Philadelphia shipyards, instilling in Malcolm the importance of treating workers with dignity. His mother, Ruth, had cleaned hotels while studying for her nursing degree, often bringing home stories of how invisible service workers could feel. These early influences had shaped Malcolm's approach to business, his insistence that everyone from baggage handlers to flight attendants be treated as essential contributors, not replaceable cogs. His quarterly flights also connected him to a past that he never wanted to forget. When he was 10, Malcolm had flown for the first time with his mother to visit his grandmother in Atlanta. Despite having confirmed tickets, they were repeatedly passed over at the gate for operational reasons until his mother, normally the most patient of women, had demanded an explanation. The gate agent had looked at them with barely concealed disdain and said, "There must be some mistake. These tickets aren't for this flight." Another passenger, a white businessman named Harold Winters, had intervened, pointing out that he had been issued a boarding pass with the same flight number. Only then, with obvious reluctance, were Malcolm and his mother allowed to board, finding themselves seated in different rows despite having booked together. That memory had fueled Malcolm's determination when he founded SkyLink Airlines. "Every passenger deserves dignity" became not just a marketing slogan, but a core operating principle. And now, sitting in seat 24B, the recipient of Diane Fletcher's vitriol, he was experiencing firsthand how far his company still had to go to realize that vision. As the CEO, he could have revealed his identity at any moment, shutting down Diane's tirade with a flash of his credentials. But Malcolm knew that would only address the symptom, not the disease. Instead, he remained silent, watching, evaluating, and formulating a response that would address the root of the problem. He watched the boarding process with a practiced eye. He saw a young mother struggling with a car seat and a toddler, and noted the kindness of a flight attendant named Sophia, who knelt down to help her, distracting the child with a little plastic wings pin. That was good. That was the culture he wanted. He saw a group of college students, boisterous but respectful, quickly stowing their backpacks. Then he saw her. She arrived in a flurry of expensive perfume and audible sighs. Her name, he would soon learn, was Diane Fletcher. She was a sharply dressed woman in her early 50s with a severe blonde bob and a face locked in a mask of perpetual dissatisfaction. Trailing behind her was a man, presumably her husband Thomas, who looked exhausted, as if he had been apologizing for her existence for the past 30 years. Diane's ticket was for seat 24A, the window seat next to Malcolm. Her husband was across the aisle in 24C. Her first act upon arriving at the row was to glare at the young student already settled in the middle seat, 24B, who was not Malcolm but a young student named Brandon engrossed in his phone. And then at Malcolm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with impatience. "Some of us need to get through." Malcolm politely stood up, stepping into the aisle to let Brandon and Diane get situated. She didn't acknowledge him. Instead, her attention was fixated on the overhead bin directly above their row. It was already full. Unbelievable, she snapped loud enough for half the cabin to hear. This is what happens when you let just anyone board. No concept of order. She spun around and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Sophia, the helpful flight attendant. "You flight attendant, this bin is full. I am a Titanium Elite member. My bag goes here." Sophia approached with a professional smile, though Malcolm could see the slight tightening around her eyes. "I understand, ma'am. The bins do fill up quickly. I can help you find a spot for your bag a few rows back." "No," Diane retorted, her voice rising. "I am not going to be separated from my carry-on. My medication is in there and my laptop. You need to make someone move their bag. Someone who isn't a Titanium Elite member." Her eyes flickered towards Malcolm, who was still standing patiently in the aisle, then to a student's simple canvas backpack in the bin. "Ma'am, all passengers in this section have priority boarding. I can't ask someone to move their bag once it's stowed." Sophia explained, her training kicking in. "I assure you a bag just 2 rows back will be perfectly safe." "This is ridiculous. What is the point of loyalty? What is the point of status?" Diane huffed, finally, shoving her designer roller bag into Thomas's chest. "Fine, you deal with it," she commanded before squeezing past Brandon to get to her window seat, pointedly avoiding any eye contact with Malcolm. Thomas, looking deeply apologetic, found a spot for her bag 3 rows back and settled into 24C. As he sat, he gave Malcolm a small, weary nod, a silent apology for the prelude. Malcolm simply nodded back. He had seen passengers like this before, entitled status-obsessed and quick to anger. They were a small but loud minority. He opened his novel, a well-worn paperback, preparing for a long flight. He had already made a few notes on his phone. Boarding process for high-value customers feels chaotic. Perceived bin space scarcity is a major friction point. Follow up with ops. For the first hour of the flight, a tense peace held. The plane took off, climbed to its cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign pinged off. Diane spent the entire time tapping furiously on her laptop, her elbows jutting out consistently, encroaching on Malcolm's space. He subtly angled his body away, seating the armrest and a few inches of his personal bubble without a word. He knew from experience that engaging would be like throwing gasoline on a smoldering fire. He was here to observe, not to create a scene. And in this moment of minor discomfort, he was learning something valuable about the passenger experience. Seat width armrest. Policies, the unspoken ballet of physical boundaries in confined spaces. These were not trivial matters in an industry where hundreds of humans were regularly packed into aluminum tubes for hours at a time. The drink service began. When Sophia reached their row, Diane cut her off before she could even speak. "I'll have a double tequila and soda with 2 limes, and I expect it to be complimentary." "Titanium Elite," she stated, as if announcing a royal title. "Of course, ma'am." Sophia said, her smile unwavering. She turned to Malcolm. "And for you, sir?" "Just a coffee black, please," Malcolm said warmly. Diane let out a short, derisive scoff. It was almost imperceptible, but Malcolm heard it. It was the sound of judgment, the sound of someone making 1,000 assumptions based on his tracksuit, his skin color, and his simple drink order. He felt a familiar weary tightening in his chest, but he let it pass. He was Malcolm Bennett, CEO of SkyLink Airlines, and he was just a passenger in 24B having a cup of coffee. For now, that was all he needed to be. The real storm he sensed was yet to make landfall. The catalyst, when it came, was trivial. It always is. About 2 hours into the flight, Malcolm needed to use the restroom. He closed his book, placing it on his seat, and said a quiet, "Excuse me," to Diane. She didn't look up from her laptop. She simply pressed herself back into her seat with an exaggerated sigh, not moving her legs an inch. It was a deliberate, passive-aggressive obstruction. Malcolm recognized the power play immediately. It was a small assertion of control, a territorial marking that said, "You may pass, but only on my terms, and only with my permission." He had seen similar behaviors throughout his career, the deliberate withholding of cooperation as a means of establishing dominance. Malcolm, a man who was 6'3", had no choice but to awkwardly contort himself to squeeze past her leg brushing against hers for a fraction of a second. "Oh my God," she shrieked, recoiling as if he had burned her. "Watch where you're going. You can't just climb all over people." The volume of her voice startled the surrounding passengers. Heads popped up over the tops of seats. Thomas across the aisle sank lower, his face flushing with embarrassment. Malcolm paused in the aisle, turning back to her. He kept his voice low and steady. "I do apologize. There wasn't much room. There's plenty of room if you have any decency or spatial awareness," she sneered, finally looking up at him. Her eyes filled with a disdain that went far beyond the minor inconvenience. "People like you just have no sense of personal space." The phrase hung in the air, charged and ugly. "People like you." It was a classic dog whistle, a thinly veiled slur wrapped in plausible deniability. Malcolm's jaw tightened, but his expression remained placid. He had faced down hostile corporate raiders and union negotiators. He would not be broken by a bully in seat 24A. "I'll be more careful next time," he said, his tone neutral, before turning and walking towards the lavatory. His mind, however, was racing. This was no longer just about a rude passenger. This had crossed a line into something far more toxic. He wasn't just an observer anymore. The CEO in him was now analyzing a severe failure in the passenger environment he was responsible for. In the lavatory, Malcolm took a moment to collect himself. He stared at his reflection in the small mirror, seeing not just himself but the legacy of his parents. His father, who had worked double shifts at the Philadelphia shipyards for 30 years. His mother, who had cleaned hotel rooms while studying for her nursing degree. They had taught him that dignity wasn't something that could be taken away by someone else's prejudice. He thought about the choice before him. He could reveal his identity, watch the color drain from Diane Fletcher's face as she realized her mistake. It would be satisfying, a moment of perfect justice. But it would be a personal victory, not a structural one. The company he had built was bigger than any individual, including himself. What mattered wasn't vindicating Malcolm Bennett, but ensuring that SkyLink's core values were upheld for every passenger on every flight, whether the CEO was present or not. When he returned a few minutes later, he saw that Diane had deliberately spread her belongings, her laptop bag, her shawl, a magazine partially onto his seat. It was another petty power play, a territorial marking. This time Malcolm didn't ask. He simply picked up her magazine and shawl, folded them neatly, and handed them to her. "I believe these are yours." The act of him touching her things seemed to flip a switch in her mind. Her face contorted with rage. "How dare you!" she yelled, her voice now a full-blown shout that silenced the cabin's low hum. "Who do you think you are, putting your hands on my property? You probably have sticky fingers. I should check my wallet." Gasps rippled through the nearby rows. Mrs. Vasquez, in row 27, audibly muttered, "For heaven's sake, that is uncalled for." Thomas Fletcher leaned across the aisle, his voice a desperate whisper. "Diane, for God's sake, stop it. Just stop. Don't you dare tell me to stop." "Thomas," she shrieked, turning her fury on him, "I am being harassed by this man. He's been crowding me. He touched me and now he's grabbing my things. He probably shouldn't even be in this section to begin with. Did you use your welfare check to buy this ticket?" The accusation was so vile, so nakedly racist, that a profound silence fell over the cabin. Every eye was now on their row. Brandon, the young student by the window, looked horrified, pressing himself against the fuselage as if to disappear. Malcolm stood perfectly still in the aisle, his face an unreadable mask, but inside a cold, precise anger was solidifying. He had built SkyLink Airlines on a foundation of respect. It was in their mission statement, their training manuals, their brand identity, and this woman was setting a torch to it right in front of him. Sophia arrived, her face pale but determined. "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice. You are disturbing the other passengers." "Oh, I'm disturbing them." Diane laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "This man is the problem. He is harassing a Titanium Elite customer. I want him moved. Now. Put him in the back of the plane where he belongs." Sophia glanced around, suddenly aware that the entire cabin was watching this unfold. She had been trained for situations like this, but the raw hatred in Diane's voice, the naked prejudice, was beyond anything covered in the conflict resolution modules. This wasn't an ordinary passenger dispute. It was a moral confrontation, a moment that would reveal the airline's true values, not just its procedures. Sophia thought of her own grandmother, who had cleaned houses in wealthy neighborhoods where some homeowners wouldn't let her use their bathroom. She thought of her brother, who had been followed by store security for wearing a hoodie. She thought of the countless small indignities her family had faced, the constant need to prove they belonged in spaces others entered without question. Sir Sophia said, turning to Malcolm, her eyes pleading for some form of de-escalation. "Is there a problem here?" Malcolm finally spoke, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "Yes, there is. This passenger has made several baseless and deeply offensive accusations against me. I have done nothing but sit quietly in the seat I paid for." "Paid for, I highly doubt it." Diane spat. "I want him moved. He is making me feel unsafe. He has an aggressive energy. You know what I mean." She gave Sophia a conspiratorial knowing look, a disgusting invitation to share in her prejudice. It was a test for the young flight attendant, a moment that would define her career, though she didn't know it. Malcolm watched her, his breath held. Would she follow protocol? Would she crumble under the pressure of a high-value customer? Sophia's spine straightened. "Ma'am, you are the one causing the disturbance. Your language is inappropriate and violates our airline's code of conduct. I will not be moving this gentleman. I need you to calm down or I will be forced to report this to the captain." The defiance enraged Diane. Her face turned a blotchy red. "Your captain, I'll report you to your captain. I'll have your job for this. You think your little plastic wings mean anything to me? I spend over $100,000 a year with this airline. I am more important to this company than you will ever be. Now get me the captain or at least the head purser and get this thug out of my sight." She jabbed her finger towards Malcolm's chest, her nail coming within an inch of his shirt. In the row across, a young man named Leo Alvarez had discreetly propped his phone against the window, the camera angled perfectly. He had been recording for the last 2 minutes. Leo had grown up in a neighborhood where police were called on suspicious Hispanic teenagers for simply walking home from school. He had learned early that in a world biased against you, documentation was sometimes your only defense. Now, as a successful software developer, he still carried that lesson. His finger hovered over the stop button, but something told him this confrontation was far from over. Malcolm looked at Sophia, giving her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. She had done the right thing, but this situation was now beyond her. I think Malcolm said, his voice still unnervingly calm, that involving the lead flight attendant is an excellent idea. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from tense to toxic. The soft lighting and gentle engine drone did nothing to mask the raw, ugly scene unfolding in row 24. Sophia Rodriguez, standing firm in the aisle, felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Her training had covered disruptive passengers, but the sheer venom and racism emanating from Diane Fletcher were beyond anything the simulators could replicate. Sophia thought of her first day at SkyLink, the way the training supervisor had emphasized that their job was not just physical safety, but emotional safety, creating an environment where every passenger could travel with dignity. Sometimes the supervisor had said that means standing up to people who would deny others that dignity. Fine, Sophia said, her voice betraying a slight tremble despite her resolve. Please remain in your seat. I will notify the lead flight attendant. She gave Malcolm a quick, apologetic look before making a swift retreat toward the galley phone. As Sophia moved up the aisle, she felt a curious mixture of terror and pride. She had never directly confronted a high-status passenger before, certainly not one claiming to spend 6 figures annually with the airline. At her previous employer, such a customer would have been immediately appeased regardless of their behavior. But SkyLink was different. Their training had been explicit. Status did not entitle anyone to mistreat others. Diane smirked, a triumphant, ugly twisting of her lips. She saw this as a victory. In her mind, the chain of command was being activated to serve her. About time someone with authority got involved, she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. She straightened her blouse and rearranged her shawl, preening as if she had already won. She leaned over to her husband. See, Thomas? This is how you handle things. You can't be a doormat your entire life. Thomas just buried his face in his hands, shaking his head slowly. He had witnessed variations of this scene dozens of times over their marriage, at restaurants, when the service wasn't instantaneous, at hotels, when the room wasn't perfect, at dinner parties, when someone dared to disagree with Diane's opinions. Always, it ended the same way, with his wife's temporary triumph and his own deepening shame. But this time felt different. The racial component was so blatant, so public, so indefensible. And for the first time, Thomas felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty that this particular bridge, once crossed, could never be rebuilt. Malcolm calmly sat back down in his seat. He didn't look at Diane. He didn't engage. He simply picked up his novel, his posture relaxed. This act of quiet defiance seemed to infuriate her more than any shouting match could have. Still here, she hissed at him. Don't get comfortable. You'll be taking the walk of shame to the back of the bus any minute now. Malcolm turned a page. He was no longer just the CEO observing a problem. He was now the calm center of a storm, a living embodiment of the principles he preached. His composure was his shield and his weapon. Every second of his silence amplified her screeching hysteria. He was thinking strategically now. This incident had to be handled, but it also had to become a lesson. A teachable moment, as his HR department would call it, though that term felt far too sterile for the situation. A few minutes later, a man in a crisp uniform, James Wilson, the lead flight attendant, appeared. He was older, with a kind face, but eyes that showed he had seen it all. Ma'am, I'm James, the lead flight attendant, he said, his voice a soothing baritone. Sophia has informed me of the situation. I need to understand what's happened. James was well aware of the complexity of the situation. Sophia had briefed him succinctly in the galley racial harassment high-status passenger multiple witnesses. His 20 years of experience told him this was a potential powder keg. One wrong word could escalate things further. One moment of weakness could undermine Sophia's authority and send the wrong message to the entire cabin. Diane launched into a dramatic, embellished retelling. This man she began pointing at Malcolm was aggressive from the moment I sat down. He was crowding my space. He got physical with me when he went to the bathroom, and then he started grabbing my personal belongings. I told him to stop and he became menacing. I feel threatened, and your flight attendant was completely dismissive. She took his side. I am a Titanium Elite member, and I am being treated like a criminal while this man who clearly has an anger problem is allowed to intimidate me. James listened patiently, his gaze flickering between Diane's theatrical performance, Thomas's mortified expression, and Malcolm's unnerving calm. He then turned to Malcolm. "Sir, would you like to share your perspective?" Before Malcolm could speak, Mrs. Vasquez from the row behind leaned forward. "Excuse me, sir," she said to James, her voice quavering with indignation. "I've been sitting right here. That woman is lying." The gentleman did absolutely nothing. He was polite. He was quiet, and she has been verbally abusing him since we took off. What she said to him, it was disgusting. Racist and disgusting. Gabriela Vasquez had not planned to get involved. At her age, she preferred to avoid confrontation. But something about the quiet dignity of the man in 24B contrasted with the venomous lies of the woman beside him had triggered a deep sense of moral obligation. She thought of her own children and grandchildren of the world they would inherit, and knew she could not remain silent. Leo chimed in from across the aisle. "She's right. I saw the whole thing. He barely touched her by accident and she went nuclear, accused him of all sorts of things. It's completely out of line." Leo's intervention was deliberate. As a person of color himself, he recognized the importance of allyship. Too often he had witnessed incidents where bigotry went unchallenged because bystanders chose comfort over confrontation. Not today. Not on this flight. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. A woman 3 rows back called out, "I heard what she said. It was awful." A business traveler added, "The gentleman hasn't done anything wrong." The collective response surprised even James, who had rarely seen such spontaneous support for a harassed passenger. Usually people kept their heads down, pretending not to notice difficult situations. But something about this incident, perhaps the stark contrast between Malcolm's composure and Diane's vitriol, had galvanized the cabin. Diane's face went white with fury. "How dare you? You're all ganging up on me. You're probably all friends." The accusation was so absurd that a few nervous laughs escaped from nearby passengers. The idea that this diverse group of strangers had somehow coordinated to persecute Diane Fletcher was the desperate logic of entitlement cornered by reality. James held up a hand. "Ma'am, please, let's keep the volume down." He looked at Malcolm, an unspoken question in his eyes. Malcolm finally closed his book and looked at James. "Their accounts are accurate. I have tried not to engage with this passenger, but her behavior and her language have been unacceptable and are in clear violation of your airline's code of conduct, specifically the clauses on harassment and hate speech." The precision of his language mentioning specific clauses gave James pause. This wasn't the typical response from an aggrieved passenger. Most people didn't casually cite airline policy during conflicts. But James had no way of knowing that the man before him had personally drafted those policies. Diane scoffed. "Oh, listen to him, the airplane lawyer. What a joke. I want to speak to the captain. Not you, not her, the person in charge." James's patient demeanor hardened slightly. "Ma'am, the captain is currently flying the aircraft. She is responsible for the safety of 184 souls on board. She has been fully briefed via intercom. She has authorized me to handle this situation, and right now I am the authority in this cabin." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "You have been accused by multiple witnesses of using racist language and causing a major disturbance. Captain Morales has instructed me to give you one final chance to remain on this flight. You will cease all communication with this passenger. You will not speak to him, look at him, or address him in any way. You will remain quiet and seated for the remainder of the flight to San Francisco. If you violate these instructions in any way, the captain will take further action. Is that understood?" The ultimatum was delivered with the calm certainty of someone backed by both institutional authority and moral clarity. James knew he was on solid ground. Both SkyLink's policies and federal aviation regulations empowered him to set these boundaries. For the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in Diane's eyes. The united front of the crew and other passengers had finally pierced her bubble of entitlement. She was being officially warned, and the gravity of it seemed to sink in. She slumped back in her seat, her face a mask of sullen anger. She didn't verbally agree, but she crossed her arms and stared out the window, a clear, silent fine. James gave a curt nod. He looked at Malcolm. "Sir, I apologize for the distress this has caused. Please let us know if there's anything else." "Thank you, James." "You've handled it well," Malcolm said. The compliment was genuine, and James seemed to appreciate it, though he likely just took it as a passenger being supportive. As the purser walked away, a fragile truce settled over the row. The show is over for now. Malcolm reopened his book, but he wasn't reading. He was composing a text message on his phone, his thumb moving quickly and discreetly under the cover of his novel. The recipient was Rebecca Johnson, his executive vice president of operations. The message was short and encrypted with their own internal shorthand, SL-275 code, Crimson Seat 24BD. Fletcher, full incident report required from crew upon landing. Activate Protocol 9. Legal and HR to be on standby. No action until my signal. Code Crimson was a designation they reserved for the most severe in-flight incidents involving passenger misconduct, especially those involving harassment or assault against crew or other passengers. Protocol 9 was the part of the Code Crimson response that dealt with high-status passengers. It ensured that all the usual courtesies and automatic privileges of status were suspended pending a full investigation. It meant that Diane Fletcher's titanium elite shield had just been vaporized. Protocol 9 had been Malcolm's brainchild, developed after a particularly ugly incident 3 years earlier. A Platinum member had sexually harassed a flight attendant, and the initial response had been tepid, a polite warning, a note in the file, nothing substantial. When Malcolm had learned about it, he had been furious. If anything, he had told the executive team high-status customers should be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. They're on our planes more often. Their behavior sets the tone, and they've had ample opportunity to learn our expectations. The resulting protocol was comprehensive, immediate suspension of status privileges, pending investigation mandatory review by a diverse panel of staff. Clear paths to reinstatement or permanent ban based on the severity of the offense and the passenger's response to it. Most importantly, it removed decision-making from any single employee who might feel pressured by a passenger's status. He hit send. The message was delivered instantly via the plane's Wi-Fi. On the ground in the SkyLink Airlines command center in Dallas, a series of wheels had just been set in motion. Diane Fletcher thought she had been silenced. In reality, she had just delivered a monologue on the biggest stage of her life, and the CEO of the company was sitting in the front row taking notes. For the next hour, an unnerving silence reigned in row 24. It was a loud silence, thick with unspoken resentment. Diane Fletcher stared stonily out the window, her jaw set so tight Malcolm could see the muscles pulsing. She refused the second drink service with a venomous glare, and pointedly angled her body away from him, her shoulder a rigid wall of defiance. To an outside observer, she was now a compliant passenger. But Malcolm, a student of human behavior, saw something else. He saw a pressure cooker. She wasn't subdued. She was simmering, waiting for her moment to reassert the dominance she felt had been stolen from her. Malcolm, for his part, appeared to be completely absorbed in his book. In reality, he was observing the ripple effects. He watched Sophia and James move through the cabin, their professionalism a stark contrast to the ugliness Diane had unleashed. They were more attentive, their smiles a little warmer to the passengers around row 24, as if trying to collectively apologize for the disturbance. He noted their composure under fire. They would both be getting commendations and a raise. The moment Diane had been waiting for came as the plane began its initial descent into San Francisco. The captain's voice, calm and authoritative, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morales. We are beginning our descent and should be on the ground in approximately 35 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." The familiar routine began collecting trash, ensuring seat belts were fastened and tray tables were up. Sophia made her way down the aisle, her movements efficient. When she reached their row, she collected a coffee cup from Thomas and a wrapper from Brandon. She looked at Diane. "Ma'am, I need you to put your laptop away for landing, please." Diane, who had just reopened it, snapped it shut with unnecessary force. "Fine. And your tray table needs to be locked in the upright position." Diane violently slammed the tray table up, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. It was a petulant, childish act, and Sophia wisely chose to ignore it. She turned to Malcolm. "Sir, anything I can take for you?" "No, I'm all set." "Thank you, Sophia. You and James have done an excellent job today," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. Hearing him praise the flight attendant was the final straw for Diane. The perceived injustice, the public humiliation, the utter failure of her status to bend the world to her, well, it all came boiling back to the surface. Her carefully constructed dam of silence broke. "An excellent job." She scoffed, her voice a low, venomous hiss that quickly escalated. "An excellent job of catering to him, of letting your paying loyal customers be harassed. This is the worst service I have ever received. The worst, and I will not be silent about it." She unbuckled her seatbelt. Thomas, seeing the look in her eyes, reached across the aisle. "Diane, no. Sit down. The seatbelt sign is on." She ignored him, standing up unsteadily as the plane banked slightly. She pointed a trembling finger first at Sophia, then at Malcolm. "You two are in for a world of hurt. I am going to write a letter to your CEO, not some mid-level manager, but to Malcolm Bennett himself. I know people. I will make sure he knows how his employees treat his best customers. And as for you," she snarled, her face inches from Malcolm's, "I'm going to find out who you are. The world is a small place. You will regret messing with me." This was it. The final irrevocable line. Standing up during final descent, unbuckling her seatbelt, and directly threatening a passenger and a crew member. In the post-9/11 world of aviation, she had just transformed herself from a mere disruptive passenger into a federal-level security threat. Sophia immediately spoke into a wrist-worn communication device. "Flight deck, this is Sophia. Passenger in 24A is unbuckled and standing, being verbally abusive to crew and passengers. She is non-compliant." The response from the cockpit was instantaneous. The plane's intercom crackled to life, but this time it wasn't Captain Morales's pleasant, pre-recorded sounding voice. It was sharp, clear, and filled with the ice-cold authority of someone in absolute command. "This is the captain. Passenger in seat 24A. This is a direct order. Return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt immediately. Failure to comply with the instructions of a flight crew member is a federal offense. Sit down now." The entire cabin froze. The absolute authority in Captain Morales's voice, the public nature of the command, the invocation of federal law. All of it created an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Passengers held their breath, waiting to see if Diane would comply, or if the situation would escalate further. Diane stood there momentarily stunned by the direct command from the flight deck. In that brief moment of hesitation, James seemed to materialize out of nowhere, his kind face now a stern mask. "Ma'am," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The captain has given you a lawful order. Sit down or you will be restrained." The word restrained finally did it. The threat of physical subjugation was something her privileged life had never prepared her for. Defeated, she collapsed back into her seat, fumbling with the seat belt, her face a mixture of shock and incandescent rage. She was finally truly silenced. The rest of the descent was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The tension was a living thing in the cabin. Malcolm Bennett remained perfectly still. Outwardly, he was the picture of calm. Inwardly, his mind was a flurry of activity. The incident had escalated. His initial plan to handle this as a severe customer service failure had now shifted. This was a security breach. He sent a second text to Rebecca Johnson: update Level 1 security incident. Non-compliance with crew direct threats. SFO ground staff and law enforcement must meet the aircraft. No exceptions. Confirm receipt. A reply came back in seconds. Confirmed Malcolm. SFO station manager, head of security, and SFPD are being notified. They will be waiting at the gate. Are you okay? Malcolm texted back. I'm fine. Maintain protocol. I am passenger Bennett in 24B until I am off this plane and clear of the area. No one knows who I am. It must stay that way for now. Malcolm knew that maintaining his anonymity was crucial to the integrity of the process. If the crew or other passengers learned who he was, their behavior would change, their statements might be influenced, the purity of the test would be compromised. More importantly, revealing his identity now would make this about him personally rather than about the company's values and systems. The plane's wheels screeched softly as they made contact with the runway at San Francisco International Airport. The landing was smooth, a testament to Captain Morales' skill. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, a sense of dread began to permeate the cabin. Everyone knew this wasn't a normal arrival. The plane came to a stop at the gate. The engines spooled down. The familiar ding sounded, signaling it was safe to unbuckle. But Captain Morales' voice came over the intercom once more, stopping everyone in their tracks. Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety and security, please remain seated with your seat belts fastened until law enforcement has boarded the aircraft. I repeat, remain seated. A wave of murmurs swept through the plane. Law enforcement. For what? Every eye in the cabin turned to the woman in seat 24A. Diane Fletcher's face had gone from red with rage to the color of ash. The reality of her actions was descending upon her as surely as the plane had descended upon the runway. She had yelled, she had threatened, she had disobeyed the captain, and now the consequences were waiting for her just outside the door. She looked at her husband, her eyes wide with panic. Thomas simply closed his eyes, unable to even look at her. He had warned her. They both knew this was a disaster of her own making. The jet bridge connected to the aircraft with a solid, definitive thud. The sound seemed to echo the finality of the situation. Inside the cabin was eerily silent, the passengers held captive by the captain's orders and a morbid sense of anticipation. No one checked their phones, no one reached for their bags. All eyes were either fixed forward towards the door or darting furtively towards row 24. Diane Fletcher was frozen in her seat. The bravado, the arrogance, the righteous indignation, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a brittle shell of fear. She kept swallowing hard, her manicured hands clutching the armrests, her knuckles white. She was no longer a titanium elite member about to make a complaint. She was a specimen under a microscope, the subject of 183 other people's judgment. The aircraft door hissed open. The first two people to step on board were not smiling gate agents. They were uniformed officers of the San Francisco Police Department's Airport Bureau. One was a tall, stoic man with a salt and pepper mustache. The other, a younger, sharp-eyed woman. They were followed by a man in a dark suit, his SkyLink Airlines corporate ID badge, identifying him as the SFO station manager. The station manager, a man named Derek Parker, conferred quietly with James at the front of the galley. James pointed discreetly towards the middle of the plane. The officers and Parker began to walk down the aisle, their footsteps heavy in the silence. The walk felt like it took an eternity. They passed row after row of silent, staring faces. When they reached row 24, they stopped. "Ma'am," the male officer said, his voice calm and professional, directed at Diane. "Are you Diane Fletcher?" She could only manage a weak, trembling nod. "We need you to come with us. Please grab your personal belongings from under the seat. We'll retrieve your overhead luggage for you." "Come with you." "Why?" She stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper of its former shriek. "I haven't done anything wrong." "It was him." Her finger jabbed weakly in Malcolm's direction. He started it. Malcolm didn't even flinch. He just stared straight ahead, his expression neutral. He was now a witness, nothing more. The female officer stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, we have received a report from the flight crew regarding a security disturbance. We just need to ask you a few questions off the aircraft. Please, let's not make a bigger scene than necessary." The phrase "bigger scene" seemed to register with Diane. The humiliation was complete. In front of the entire plane, the plane she felt she owned a small piece of, she was being singled out and escorted away by the police. Her husband Thomas was already standing, his face a mask of shame. "I'm her husband," he said quietly to the officers. "Should I come too?" "You're free to deplane with the other passengers once we have your wife secured, sir," the officer replied. "But we only need to speak with her." Slowly, shakily, Diane unbuckled her seatbelt one last time. As she stood, the entire cabin watched her. There were no jeers, no applause, just a heavy, suffocating silence. She wouldn't look at Malcolm. She wouldn't look at anyone. She kept her eyes on the floor as if the cheap carpeting held the secrets to her undoing. The officers patiently waited as Thomas retrieved her designer bag from the bin 3 rows back, handing it to her without a word. With one officer in front of her and one behind Diane, Fletcher was escorted up the aisle. It was the true walk of shame she had so callously wished upon Malcolm earlier. As she passed, he didn't watch her go. He simply picked up his novel and his small backpack from under his seat. His part in this public drama was over. His part in the private consequences was just beginning. Once she and the officers were off the plane, the captain's voice came on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. You are now free to deplane. On behalf of SkyLink Airlines, I apologize for the delay and the disturbance. We wish you a pleasant stay in San Francisco or a safe onward journey." A collective sigh of relief filled the cabin as the familiar sounds of unbuckling and bag retrieving resumed. The spell was broken. Malcolm waited patiently for the rows ahead of him to clear another anonymous passenger in the crowd. As he walked past the cockpit, he saw Captain Morales standing at the door overseeing the deplaning. Their eyes met for a brief second. He gave her a subtle, appreciative nod. She, unaware of his identity but recognizing him as the target of the abuse, gave him a small, professional nod in return. It was an acknowledgement of a shared, unpleasant experience. He walked down the jet bridge, melting into the river of people heading towards the terminal. He saw Diane Thomas, the officers, and the station manager standing off to the side in a glass-walled waiting area, the initial questioning already underway. Diane was crying now, gesturing wildly. Thomas stood a few feet away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Malcolm didn't stop. He didn't linger. He walked past them without a second glance. He pulled out his phone and sent a final text to Rebecca Johnson. "I'm off the plane. The package is delivered. Initiate Phase 2. Right away came the reply. "The letters are drafted. The calls are ready to be made. Hope the rest of your day is better, boss." Malcolm allowed himself a small, grim smile. His day was just getting started. Diane Fletcher had been removed from the plane. Now Malcolm Bennett was about to remove her from his airline and her own comfortable life permanently. The karma was queued up and ready for delivery. The consequences for Diane Fletcher did not arrive like a thunderstorm, loud and sudden. They arrived like a series of precise, devastating surgical strikes executed with the cold, quiet efficiency of a Fortune 500 company protecting its brand and its principles. The first strike, the ban. 2 days later, back in her sprawling suburban home in New York, Diane was still reeling. The incident at SFO had ended with a stern warning, a citation for interfering with a flight crew, and a hefty fine. She was banned from the airport for 24 hours. The humiliation was immense, but she was convinced she could fix it. She was, after all, Diane Fletcher. She would write a strongly worded letter, leverage her status, and demand compensation for her traumatic experience. She was the victim here. That morning, an email landed in her inbox. The subject line was stark. Regarding your SkyLink Airlines Titanium Elite membership. The email was from the office of the president. It was brief and utterly brutal. Dear Ms. Fletcher, this letter serves as official notification regarding an incident that occurred on Flight SL-275 on September 5, 2023. Following a full review of reports from the flight crew, multiple passenger witnesses, and the captain of the flight, a determination has been made. Your behavior, which included verbal harassment of a fellow passenger, the use of racist and derogatory language, and failure to comply with lawful crew member instructions, constitutes a severe violation of SkyLink Airlines' conditions of carriage. This behavior endangered the safety and well-being of our crew and customers. Effective immediately, you are permanently banned from all future travel on SkyLink Airlines and any of our partner carriers. Your SkyLink Miles account has been permanently closed, and your entire mileage balance of 1,247,682 miles has been forfeited in accordance with our program rules regarding member misconduct. Your Titanium Elite status is hereby revoked. This decision is final and not subject to appeal. Sincerely, Corporate Security and Conduct Division, SkyLink Airlines, Inc. Diane read it 3 times. 1.25 million miles gone. Years of dedicated travel, of feeling important, of being recognized, vaporized. The ban was a slap in the face, but the forfeiture of her miles was a punch to the gut. It was theft in her eyes. She screamed in frustration, throwing her tablet across the room where it clattered against a wall. Thomas, who had been sleeping in the guest room since their return, didn't even come to see what was wrong. The second strike, the corporate call. Meanwhile, in the sleek, minimalist Dallas headquarters of SkyLink Airlines, Malcolm Bennett sat in his office with Rebecca Johnson and Victoria Adams, his chief legal counsel. On the large screen in front of them was the file on Diane Fletcher. It now included Sophia's report, James's report, Captain Morales's official log entry, and written statements from 3 other passengers, including Mrs. Vasquez and Leo Alvarez, who had voluntarily offered them to the SFO station manager. Leo had also provided the video, which was damning. Her employer, Malcolm, asked, his voice calm. Vanguard Consulting Group. Rebecca replied, pulling up another file. A major player. They're one of our top 10 corporate accounts. We handle nearly 90% of their domestic executive travel. The contract is worth about $7.8 million a year. Malcolm nodded slowly. This was the delicate part. He could easily get Diane Fletcher fired. One call, one threat to pull the contract, and she'd be gone. But that wasn't his style. That was the brutish power play of a lesser leader. He believed in giving people and organizations the chance to do the right thing themselves. "Get me Philip Brooks on the phone," Malcolm said. Philip Brooks was the CEO of Vanguard Consulting. They had met a few times at business conferences. A few minutes later, the connection was made. "Phil, Malcolm Bennett here. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, Malcolm." "Good to hear from you." "No, not at all." "What can I do for you?" "Everything good with the corporate account." Brooks's voice was friendly, but with the cautious edge of a CEO who knows a call from a major supplier could be about anything. "The account is fine, Phil. I'm calling about a more sensitive matter. An employee of yours, Diane Fletcher, was involved in a serious security incident on one of my flights last Friday." Malcolm proceeded to lay out the facts. He was clinical and objective. He didn't mention that he was the passenger involved. He simply stated that a senior employee of their company had engaged in racist harassment and had become a security risk, forcing the captain to call for law enforcement. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "My God," Brooks finally responded. "Malcolm, I had no idea." "Are you serious?" "Completely," Malcolm said. "Phil, we value our partnership, and I know Vanguard has a strong code of conduct. I'm not calling to tell you how to run your business. I'm calling because her actions, which were witnessed by many, reflect on your company, and frankly, the behavior she exhibited is cancerous. We can't have it on our planes, and I imagine you don't want it in your boardroom." He then delivered the master stroke. "I have a video of the incident, Phil. It's clear it's unambiguous and it's deeply disturbing. I'm going to have my office send you a secure link. What you do with it is your decision. I just thought you needed to see who is representing the Vanguard brand when they travel." Brooks was practically sputtering. "Thank you, Malcolm. I appreciate the discretion. I will look at this immediately. We will handle this. I promise you this is not what we stand for." Malcolm knew he had planted a seed. Corporations like Vanguard were terrified of two things: losing major clients and PR nightmares. He had just handed Philip Brooks a potential explosion and the evidence to justify extinguishing the fuse. The third and final strike. The fallout. The video was as damning as Malcolm had promised. Philip Brooks watched it with his head of HR and legal counsel. They saw their top rainmaker, Diane Fletcher, a woman who brought in millions in business, unleash a torrent of racist bile and entitled rage. They saw her being a liability not just to SkyLink Airlines, but to their own brand. Diane was called into an emergency meeting the next day. She walked in expecting to discuss quarterly projections. She was met by Brooks and the head of HR. They didn't waste time. Diane Brooks began, his face grim. "We've been made aware of an incident on your flight back from New York." She immediately launched into a practiced, self-victimizing narrative, but Brooks cut her off. "We've seen the video, Diane." The color drained from her face. "Video? What video?" He turned his laptop around. Her own furious, contorted face stared back at her. He played 30 seconds of her screaming at Malcolm, culminating in her vile, racist accusations. She had no defense. There was no spinning it. It was all there. "Your actions were a profound violation of this company's Code of Conduct and Ethics policy," the HR head said, sliding a folder across the table. "They have exposed this firm to significant reputational risk. As such, we are terminating your employment effective immediately." It was over. Her career, her massive salary, her expense account, her identity gone. She was escorted out of the building by security, her belongings to be couriered to her later. The final blow came that evening. Thomas, who had been quiet and distant, finally sat her down in their cavernous, silent living room. "I can't do this anymore, Diane," he said, his voice weary and broken. "For 15 years I've been making excuses for you. Your temper, the way you treat service staff, your prejudices. I always told myself it was just stress. But that flight, seeing you like that, seeing the hate in your eyes, I don't know who you are anymore. Or maybe I've just been refusing to see it. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm moving out tomorrow." Within the span of a week, Diane Fletcher had lost her privileged status, her career, and her marriage. Her life, built on a foundation of arrogance and entitlement, had completely unraveled. All because she couldn't stand the sight of a black man sitting in a seat he was entitled to, a man she had no idea was the architect of the very world she was flying in and the architect of her impending doom. A month later, Malcolm Bennett stood before a graduating class of new SkyLink Airlines flight attendants. The training auditorium was packed, the young, eager faces looking up at him with a mixture of awe and nervousness. They knew who he was, The self-made billionaire, the visionary who had built a budget airline into a premium global carrier. They saw the legend, but Malcolm saw them as the most important people in his company. "Good morning," he began, his voice warm and resonant. "I'm not going to give you a long speech about synergy or shareholder value. I want to tell you a story about a flight I took recently. I was sitting in 24B in SkyLink Plus. He recounted the entire incident not for drama, but as a case study. He didn't name Diane Fletcher. He just called her a passenger. He praised Sophia Rodriguez and James Wilson, who were sitting in the front row as guests of honor, their faces flushing with pride. He told the trainees about their professionalism, their courage, and their adherence to the values of the company in the face of incredible pressure and ugliness. The passenger in that story believed her status made her important. Malcolm continued, his eyes sweeping across the room. She was wrong. What makes you important? What makes this airline great is not the balance of a frequent flyer account. It's the decency and respect we show each other. It's the safety you ensure, not just of the body, but of the spirit. Every single one of you, from the moment you put on this uniform, holds the reputation of this entire company in your hands. You are our ambassadors. You are the front line of our values. He spoke about a new initiative born from that flight, the Leading with Respect program. It was a multi-million-dollar investment in enhanced de-escalation and anti-bias training, not just for flight crews, but for all customer-facing employees, from gate agents to call center operators. It empowered them to take immediate action against harassment with the full, unequivocal backing of the C-suite. It included a new system for passengers to commend crew members for exceptional handling of difficult situations linked directly to a bonus pool he had personally seeded. The woman on that flight lost her job and her husband, he said, his tone turning somber. I take no joy in that. Her life unraveled. But actions have consequences. We live in a world where a single act of hatred can be broadcast to millions in an instant, but a single act of courage, of professionalism, of decency that can echo just as loudly. Sophia and James's actions on that day were that echo. They did the right thing. He concluded his speech, and the room erupted in a standing ovation, not just for the CEO, but for the two flight attendants sitting in the front row. Later, back in his office, Rebecca Johnson came in with a final update. Diane Fletcher's lawyers sent a demand letter, she said, placing it on his desk, threatening a lawsuit for defamation and emotional distress. Malcolm didn't even look at it. And our legal team sent them back. A single link, the unedited video from the passenger's phone. Her lawyer called back an hour later to say they would not be pursuing the matter. Good, Malcolm said, turning to look out his panoramic window at the dozens of SkyLink planes taxiing on the tarmac below. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a quiet, profound sense of responsibility. The incident had been ugly, but the outcome had been just. He hadn't sought revenge. He had simply allowed the natural consequences of one woman's actions to play out in a framework he had built to value respect above all else. He had protected his employee, his customer, his brand, and his own dignity. He watched as another plane full of hopes, dreams, and a few hundred paying customers gracefully took to the sky. It was his name on the tail fin, but it was the values inside the cabin that truly made it fly. And he knew more than ever that his work was far from finished. 1 year after a video of her racist tirade aboard a SkyLink flight went viral, resulting in her termination from Vanguard Consulting, Diane Fletcher emerged as an unlikely advocate for accountability and bias recognition. Fletcher now works with the Community Reconciliation Center in New York, speaking to corporate groups about how unconscious bias can lead to devastating consequences. I lost everything because I couldn't see past my own privilege and prejudice. Her voice was steady, chastened. My career, my marriage, my reputation, all gone in a matter of days. But that loss forced me to confront some ugly truths about myself and the assumptions I carried through life. After months of therapy and reflection, Fletcher had approached the Reconciliation Center, offering to share her experience as a cautionary tale. Her talks now helped corporate employees recognize how entitlement and unchecked bias could manifest in devastating ways. Malcolm felt a complex mixture of emotions upon learning this. There was no joy in seeing someone's life destroyed, even someone who had behaved as reprehensibly as Diane Fletcher. But there was something powerful in witnessing her transformation of that experience into something potentially constructive. Redemption was not about erasing consequences, but about finding meaning in them, about using even the darkest moments as catalysts for growth. It seemed that in her own way, Diane Fletcher was attempting to do just that. The story of Malcolm Bennett and Flight SL-275 reminds us that moments of conflict can become catalysts for transformation. While Diane Fletcher's racist outburst exposed the ugly reality of prejudice that still exists in our society, it also revealed the power of dignity in the face of hatred. Malcolm's decision to respond with strategic calm rather than reactive anger allowed a single incident to spark widespread positive change. In our world where entitlement often seems to outweigh accountability, this tale offers a powerful truth status cannot shield us from the consequences of our actions. More importantly, it shows that true leadership isn't about flaunting power, but using it wisely to create environments where respect isn't just expected, but ensured. Perhaps the most unexpected lesson comes from Diane Fletcher herself. Her journey from entitled executive to humbled advocate reminds us that even those who cause harm can find redemption not through erasing consequences, but by accepting them and working to ensure others don't repeat their mistakes. In a society that often seems increasingly divided, this serves as a hopeful reminder that transformation is always possible, even from our darkest moments. If this story of karmic justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to see that what goes around truly does come around. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where justice delivers the final, satisfying verdict. Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar situations during your travels? We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments below.